Good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome on behalf of our History Forum to tonight's talk, The Pioneers of Engineering in Tyrone. Brendan here is going to give us some knowledge of his experience. He tells me he's been 40 years working or associated with the engineering industry, so he's obviously got a wealth of information that he's going to share with us tonight. Usually at the end of the talks we have a question and answer session, so if you could bear with us in terms of the use of a wee portable mic which will be circulating around, so if you could use it, if you can hold off with your question until you get the mic, it makes it easier for everybody else to hear. And then after the question and answers there will be a cup of tea or coffee if you want to stay to avail of that and have a further chat with Brendan. So I'll just hand you over to Brendan, so if you could give him a warm welcome here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. The talk is called The Pioneers of Engineering in Tyrone, and we are going to talk about two gentlemen who are, I call them more the progenitors of the industry as opposed to the pioneers, because they were definitely not pioneers in the sense that some of us would understand. But I mean that from a religious point of view, but great men they were. I want to thank Mid-Ulster Council for inviting me to talk to you, and just so that you get the context, I'm also a member of Killesshil Clonaneese Historical Society, which is my other hat, involved with engineering and history, so I'm wearing two hats tonight. 60 years ago, this country and this county and this area was completely, it was a remote rural backwater, for the want of a better word, with a population almost entirely dependent on agriculture and agricultural products. Today it's an area that's completely changed in many, many ways. It's an industrial hub, even an international industrial hub, with a cosmopolitan population who have found employment here. Indeed, it could be argued that if you're my age, 66, that we've lived through a time of social revolution. By that I mean the things we take for granted today: nice house, nice car, nice wife or nice husband, nice boyfriend or girlfriend, or both, would have been unimaginable in the Tyrone of the late 1960s, 1950s. I will argue that the main driver in that change has been the local enterprise and local entrepreneurs. So we ask ourselves, what has been the main driver of that change? And the answer is the phenomenal growth of an industry which serves a worldwide market for equipment used in the production and transport of the basic building materials for the construction sector: aggregates, concrete, asphalt, and more recently, the recycling of those same materials so that they can be reused. Other related companies such as trailer manufacturers and aircraft access equipment have emerged as a result of the work of the early entrepreneurs and visionaries who were pioneers in their own right. Here are some images which illustrate the myriad of companies engaged in these activities that most of you will recognise. If your own company name is not up there, I apologise. But these are the major players, and there are many more companies just as important who have carved out a niche market for themselves and made an important contribution to the local economy, such as Mallon Engineering here in Killesshil, Caledon Precision Engineering, Telestack, etc., etc. There are many others too numerous to mention, but in their own way contribute to the well-being of the local economy and population. The success of any economy, whether it's local or national, is, as someone once simply stated, new money. What do I mean by that phrase, new money? I'm talking about money that comes into this area from sales of equipment to countries all over the world that is used to provide jobs, employment, etc., to those directly and indirectly involved, such as suppliers of those companies of components, and not only that, but also to local businesses that benefit indirectly from that primary activity, such as shops, supermarkets, hotels, restaurants, and various service industries. It is estimated that some 4,500 people in Tyrone benefit from employment in these companies. And to quantify that in real money, that's the equivalent of £1.8 million paid in wages and salaries every week, or £93 million per annum. So it's no wonder that you see BMWs, Mercs, 4x4s and Chelsea tractors cruising the local roads in such profusion. How did all of this begin? Well, as I said, a rural backwater almost 60 years ago. The answer is some extraordinary people. People with drive, imagination, ambition, built-in or inbuilt engineering genius, alternative thinkers, and another overlooked quality, common sense. Who were and are these people? Well, I'm glad to say some of them are with us tonight, and unfortunately some are not, as the song says, as they left us long, long before their time. Men such as the late John Finley, and the late Sylvester or Sylvia Mallon, and the late Pat Douglas. Thankfully, members of their family are with us tonight. We have Sylvie's two sons, Christy and Martin, and we have John Finley's granddaughter, Danielle. And I'd like to recognise their presence here and to remember those two great men. And the best we can do that is just give them a round of applause. I also want to mention some more of the founding fathers, men such as Pat O'Neill and Lee Mallon, founders of PowerScreen, Pat Douglas. And they are joined by other younger local entrepreneurs, and if you'll give me, I will not start naming names because there are so many of them, and if I leave anyone out, then someone's going to be offended, and I don't want that. But you all know who you are, and we're here tonight to recognise your own individual and magnificent contribution. Tonight I hope to illustrate how the birth of this industry took root and expanded to where it is today, the essential lifeblood of this community. The story begins with two young men, one a native of Amyvale in County Monaghan and the other a native of Liscallon near Greystone. The parallels between both men are equally interesting and fascinating. Both went into business on their own account in their late teens. An extraordinary feat, if you think about it. Both were ideas men, original thinkers, who were driven more by what they could make rather than what they could sell. Both had only the most basic education. Both married very young and settled just 1.5 miles from each other. And for a brief period, one worked for the other. P.S. worked for John before he too went into business on his own account. They retained a friendship between them despite competing against each other, which is a lesson I think we could all learn from. Both employed people from across the sectarian divide. Neither had any interest in a person's religion, more, as Martin Luther King once eloquently said, in the substance of their character and their integrity. About 65 years ago, a young man, quietly spoken, unassuming and extremely ambitious, started to make concrete blocks in wooden molds and to sell them to local farmers who were taking advantage of generous grants for new farm buildings. His name was John Finley. He soon discovered that this process was inefficient and labour intensive, so he took himself off to England to look at a machine that would make 11 blocks at a time. It worked like an egg layer, laying these blocks in rows on a flat concrete surface. He took with him his best and most observant worker. He bought the machine, took it home to Cullentraw, took it apart, and proceeded to build his own machine. Only this time, his machine made 22 blocks. And he did that by laying the blocks on their long edge. And then shortly after that, he recognised that if he put them on the short edge, in the same space he could have 44 blocks. Hence the Finley 44 block machine, which hundreds have been sold throughout the world. Later he improved these designs, making them more energy efficient, and today they're made automatic. At the same time, he purchased some ground locally that had sand and gravel deposits on it in Balnahay. He knew that if he could process that material, he could produce his own raw materials for making the blocks. So he set about designing and making a sand and gravel washing plant that would A, clean and dispose of clay and other unwanted material, B, separate the sand from the gravel and dewater it, and C, separate the stones or gravel into separate sizes, such as 3 mil to 10 mil, 10 to 20, and plus 20 mil. The Finley washing plant was born, which we're now looking at. Now he realised he would need a machine that would mix these materials together with the cement and water to make the concrete that he needed to make the blocks. Hence, the Finley 3-bin batcher was born. Soon he realised he needed to build an engineering factory to make these machines, as he recognised that throughout Ireland, that many other producers, like himself, of aggregate and concrete products were in a similar position. But John had the vision to see that he could sell these various machines that he, with his team of engineers, had designed and built. And here is his first engineering works in Clonaneese. Over the years, he built the engineering side of his company into an international trading organisation, selling its products all over the world. While in its early years, John employed local young men who shared his enthusiasm and drive, and having witnessed at close quarters how John had been successful, they wanted some of the action for themselves. Of these younger men, as I said, a local lad from Killesshil called Peter Sylvester Mallon, or as he was locally known, PS or Sylvie. PS was young by any standard. He started out in business when he was barely 20 years old. But he too was fired with ambition and wanted to make his own mark. He set up his own works on his father's farm and started off making extractor fans. Soon too, he was designing and making aggregate processing plants. He made the first one in response to a request from a local producer of sand and gravel, and then began selling them throughout Ireland. Again, he recruited a team of engineers and designers, fabricators and installation engineers, and by the mid-1960s he was employing some 60 people from the surrounding areas, which is an incredible amount of people in a small rural area like Killesshil. One of those people was Pat O'Neill, who went on later to form Powerscreen. And Pat tells the story that when he came there first, Sylvie asked him to design ducting for extractor fans for poultry houses to remove the foul air. And just a few years ago, he met a man called Willie Herson, who worked for PS at the time. And the people who mainly made this ducting were two tinsmiths of the travelling community called Willie and Barney Heaney, two brothers who lived locally. And Willie says to Pat, "Do you remember all those lovely drawings you made for the Heaneys to make that ducting for the extractor fans?" Pat says, "I do very well." Well, he says he never looked at one of them. So, that gives us an idea of their actual ability to make do, and you know, they were working basically with their brain as well as the hands. So Sylvie gave his team the freedom to express their own ideas in plant design and development. Until then, all the processing plants, as we have seen with John Finley's and so on and so forth, had been fixed, and as such they required a team of people to go to the site where it was going to be used and install them, which was a significant cost, and sometimes a cost that ran out of control. So it came up with an idea that if he could make a plant that was mobile, that he could deliver fully manufactured and tested and no site costs attached to it. So we came up with a mobile version, and I'm glad to say we have with us tonight his two sons, Martin and Christopher, as I said. And recently, with the assistance of Holland, who also earned his spurs in Mallon engineering. He's also from Killesshil, and well, it's the centre of the engineering universe, you know that. I hope you all know that. But he built a working model of the pioneering machine, and is right here tonight. Christy or Martin, would one of you come up and unveil it, please? And let's see it work, because it is not just a model, but a working model.
Make no more about it than me, but he does it.
So if we look at the model, you can see that the main part of it, the conveyor part of it, is actually a lattice work, and like a cantilever section. And that was the first. The one on the left was the very first machine, and now you can actually see the screen at the end shaking, which is what actually separates the materials into different sizes. Again, the same here. This is a more updated version of it, and something that the basic design is still being made today. And again, we can see that it is driven with V-belts and pulleys. They have Martin, I think your power supply has been somehow or other interrupted.
I think we would just look at the other one.
Oh, it does work. So we have a hopper with a little reciprocating feeder feeding onto a belt that in turn feeds onto the screen, and then the screen, as you can see in 3 different bays, screens out the 3 different sizes of material. Very, very simple, but extremely effective and very efficient. So this revolutionized the sand and gravel and the quarrying and the coal industry. Because here was a machine that could be made in the factory, whatever it cost in the factory and whatever it cost to deliver it, those were the costs. So that was important. So all those brightly coloured machines that you see driving up and down the M1, from Power Screen, from Telescreen, from McCluskey, from Sandvik, there's the mama and papa sitting in front of you. Now, the concept of a mobile screening unit was revolutionary, as it could be made and, as I said, commissioned in the factory. And it was a new departure, rich in potential, as can be seen from the advertisement that Mallon Portable Screening Plant. And it lists there, if you can read that, all the advantages of owning one. And one of the people that PS employed to sell this was an ex-fire extinguisher salesman called Pat Douglas. And very quickly, Pat, being a very astute individual, soon figured out that this machine had potential. Pat O'Neill, who also designed it, and Lee Mallon, who made it, also recognised the potential of it. Now, one of the problems when this machine is working is that if the material is sticky or dirty, it will clog up the screen mesh. It's called blinding. And Sylvie came up with the most revolutionary idea. When Martin was a kid, he told me that he saw his father with a hatchet taking a piano apart in the backyard. And the reason he was doing that was to get at the wires of the piano. And he put them in parallel instead of mesh. And the sharpness of the wire, when the material passed over it, actually cut through the material and became the most efficient way of screening dirty material that you could imagine. That is an illustration of alternative thinking. That just doesn't happen by accident. People are born with that gift, and Sylvie certainly had that. So Every time you see one of those screens, think about Sylvie's pure piano. But the pianoware screen was born, which proved so effective that it's now a standard issue unit in coal, sand, gravel and quarrying. Where there's a problem with blinding, that's the solution. Now, I've talked here for 10 or 15 minutes, but I'm going to show you a video. The first bit of it is a daughter of John Finley called Gladys McSorley, who's talking to her niece about her father. And the second video is Martin and Christopher Mallon reminiscing about their father and his exploits. So just sit back and enjoy it, please. Thank you.
Lights.
Carlos, can you tell me a little bit about Granny's life and some of the things that he created and how he became so successful?
He was born in Vale, and he moved into the north to a place called Lismoneydown near Camden when he was about 17, I think. When he lived in Vale, he spent all his time with the local blacksmith, whose name was Jemmy. And I'd love to know who he is or what his second name was or where he was, because Daddy was then nicknamed Jemmy. All his life he's been called Jemmy, particularly his brother called him Jemmy all the time. He moved over to Lismoneydown and the farm there. So then he moved down. He moved here when he got married. I think he revolutionised the construction industry and the quarry industry with all the stuff that he invented. He, like, starting with making blocks and all the stuff that's done to aggregate, where it's mined all over the world. They're mining diamonds and they're mining gold, and it's all his equipment that's been used for that type of thing. It's really, there's that much that you really couldn't even list it all out, all the stuff that was invented. And what he invented from one thing, then he would go on to improve it and improve it again, and that's still going on to today. And it's all over the world, and his name's known all over the world. Okay, Emma, I want to show you where Daddy started off up here. It's quite small, and you just won't believe it when you see it. This is the shed here, and in fact, the little place on the top, which is only about a little over a metre wide, there's a chimney put into it. He built a chimney, and he took the steel out and used coal to bend the steel. That's how he started first. And then he progressed to this shed here, the bigger shed. It was all stone, and obviously he made the blocks for the rest of it. And obviously when he started to make the blocks then, it's just a mix match of everything.
These are the blocks he made himself.
He would have made them himself, but they would have been made just singly in like a mould, one off at a time. This would have been the area that he would have started to make the blocks here. He put down a little bit of concrete, and he had a machine that made 4 blocks. And the way it was like a tray, and the shape of 4 blocks, sort of in a row, and mold. Yeah, 4 molds. And you brought the aggregate down. You took the aggregate, it was mixed from a very basic mixer, and you took it down in like a wheelbarrow, and you tipped it into the thing, and you had a scraper, and it scraped the aggregate into the molds. And then he had a motor that made a vibration, because it had to be vibrated down.
Mm-hmm.
So it vibrated it down, and then the machine moved off to do the next 4 blocks. Very, very basic. And then at night, there was no additives that you could put into blocks in those times. So at night, in the winter time, you had to come down and cover all the blocks with with sacks, probably like potatoes were in or something like that. And then in the summertime, because they were drying out too quickly, you had to come down and water them, to keep them thing. Nowadays, you don't have to do that.
And people were really interested in this machine.
People then came from all over Ireland to see how this machine worked, and he sold it to all sorts of parts. The first blocks that were made were huge blocks, so these were replying to 4-inch blocks, which were much handier for men to use and to build with. The cement was taken from, I don't know where, I think Belfast, And I can remember it was taken on the back of a lorry with a tarpaulin over it. It was loose, and it was tipped into a bin. You know, there was no silos at that time. And the aggregate, the mixer was so basic. You had men that just shoveled the aggregate into the bottom of the mixer, and it was taken up and mixed then with the cement, and trying to get the consistency all right. I want to take you up to see the place that he really started in here first. You won't believe how small it is. Tiny. And that's where the fireplace was. Just there against the wall, you can see the remains of it. And that's what he took the coal, any coal mum he had for the house, and he used it out here in this shed to bend steel. They used to make the pipes, the concrete pipes, in this part. The pipe machine he invented as well. How did it work? You sort of had the aggregate coming down, and you had a mould, and it poured into the mould, and you sort of a man sat down very low into the ground, and some of it was perforated. So he had a little gun and he perforated it, and then they made a seal on the top, and you just took the mould up and left it, and took the mould off it, and then you had to let it set. His mind just went ballistic in trying to make one thing after another, and he slept very little, and he'd waken up in the middle of the night with an idea of something, and he'd have to write it on the wallpaper. He drew it on the wallpaper, and he used to send me back up to the house to get a copy of design or something that was on the wall. And mostly all of his drawings were done on, he smoked cigarettes, and you know, the player packet opened out flat, and nearly all the drawings that he did on sketches that he did were all done on cigarette paper. You know, the thing opened out. At the start, you couldn't get material. You know, there was nothing to be got. It was just after the war, and nearly all the stuff he used at the beginning was all from the agricultural industry.
Did the government help out?
Later on, yes, I have to say they did, but you know, that would be later on. That would have been in, say, the late 60s and 70s, because they wanted to employ people. There was mass unemployment in this area, and they did give grants, and they really meant an awful lot to get the grants at those times. This was the first building here, and actually this was the stores. Nothing's changed, it's the same as it was. And then, of course, he then bought the place up at Tullyvan. He wanted it because it was on the main road, and it grew that big that it went actually from Tullyvan right into another town. He hated to see young people that didn't have work. So he would go to somebody's house if he knew there was a young person there, maybe they're up in bed, and he'd go in and he'd say to the woman of the house, "If you're a young fella here, and go on upstairs and get him ready, I'll take him up to work now." And then he'd say to her, "You're making a cup of tea," and he'd have the teapot hid. He'd hide the teapot. And it should be all looking round trying to get him a cup of tea. Yeah, he was great for practical jokes.
Great sense of humour.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing that he came such a long way from trying to build a compressor with his brother Bobby in a shed which exploded as a child, you know, to creating some very sophisticated machinery, you know, and especially, you know, hearing what he said about, you know, God on his deathbed saying that he's had plenty more ideas. It's pretty spectacular.
And the machines are they're basically the same concept, but today, like, they're 60-ton weight, and a child could move them with a remote control. So, you know, to start from that is really something.
Period of what we're talking about here, 1958, 60, engineering always had existed in different levels, sometimes very busy and other times slacker. But as you can see today now, what in 2013, it's still developing and manufacturing different equipment here for different international companies here, and hopefully will in the future. If we were sitting talking about his greatest invention, or that, it would be no doubt the portable screener, because in them days, you know what I mean, it started off 50, 58, 59, 60. It ended up today, 2013. I'm all right, a lot bigger and a lot better, but at the end of the day, it was still the first prototype, or the first portable screener and the first principle that started off.
I might have told the story about he was young and he was going to Dungannon, and the police stopped him. He had been spinning about the roads, maybe driving too hard, and the police stopped at the Brass Stone, and the policeman knew him, and he did him beside him, and they're heading in the direction of Brandon towards Dungannon, and I think he'd hardly been around 40 men there, and the policeman said to him, "If you had to stop this car, how would you stop her?" And he says, "I just stopped it." The policeman says, "Well, when I hit the hand on the dash, you stopped the car." So the type of car was the police in the same cars, they couldn't keep brakes on them, so he couldn't get the car stopped in the right time, so he was done for having bad brakes and everything else, and he was really annoyed at this. He had the police had set him up to sort of to catch him, so he came home anyway, and he bought a different type of car altogether, a different braking system, and he spent a few days, but he changed this whole braking system onto his car. And about a fortnight or 2 weeks after, again, he was down the road, and the same policeman stopped him again. Same thing happened again down the road, and he asked him to stop, and he says he could stop, and he says, "When I hit my hand on the dash," he says, "stop," and he hit his hand on the dash, he fast stood in the brakes. The policeman went straight forward, and there was a wing up and inside the car, hit the policeman here and opened it. And it was my father had the laugh of the police that day. But then maybe about a week after that, he was up home one day working, and the police landed up to the house, the two cars I think with them, and asked him how did he put the brakes in the car, and he told them how he put the brakes in the car, and they said, "Well, tell you the truth, we have the same problem." They asked him would he could he have braking systems and do their cars, so he done a few police cars that time. He changed the braking systems over to them too and put brakes on them.
And that would have been him, like, there would have been the challenge of getting the brakes onto the car and getting them work. Like, we're talking here now, this was 1956, like, don't forget.
Very young.
56, 55, 56, 57. Well, 56, 57 it would have been.
And he was young, isn't he?
And these were Ford Populars and Ford 8s, and that was the type of cars in them times, like, you know what I mean? So, but they managed to get the braking system onto that, it was fairly successful now.
But people probably like my father, or people like they were into making money. Like it was more the kick of getting the thing up and running and seeing it working. And after it was working, they lost interest in it. He just didn't seem to have the same thing. He had more interest in making machines and money. Money actually wasn't. He made money in his early days and made a lot of money in his early days, but he spent it too. Like he believed in spending money, he didn't believe in hoarding it or keeping it or investing it. He read it again. That was the type of man he was. And most inventors are the same. Like they're not in it for the money, they're in it for the enjoyment and the challenge of putting the thing together and having a success with it.
His whole motto, like down the years, would have been, you know, create employment and keep your children at home. You know, that would have been, you know, and I suppose you see the logic of it today. Whenever the Celtic Tiger in the south and the unemployment started here, and most of the children that goes to school that just educated now has to leave the country to get a job. And in them days, you know, he would have thought it a terrible thing for lads and lassies having to go to England and go to America to get a living. And that would have been what he had been pushing all the time from the very early days of designing the machines and building them and creating employment here, 50, 60 people. Then up to the time of Mallon's foundries and all that, you know, when he still, and any man or woman that you'd have talked about around the country there, and they would have said, well, I'll tell you one thing, many of the time things was tight, but we never went home without our wages anyway. You know, that's one thing, and many of the time things was tight and hard and had to be worked hard to pay off and all the rest. But it was always done, and always succeeded in it, like, you know. But as for the engineering, as Christy says there, like, you know, for designing them machines and developing them, like whenever we look back at what he was doing in them days, with a circuit board and with a set of controls and palms and stuff, you know, he was way out on a different league of his own, you know, and that spoke wonders and spoke volumes, I should say, with the screeners that ended up a worldwide international product like that was successful throughout the world. You know, and at the end of the day, it was him designed the first one of them and it developed from there. And as I say, that's if he is about today or if he is alive today, I've no doubt he'd be terribly proud of it if he fit to play such a role in it.
But he had a good understanding of hydraulics and wiring and speeds and all that type of stuff. Like a lot of us come nuts to tell him, and he couldn't have been taught it because he just understood it. I don't know how it was, but he understood it, and he understood how to put things together very simply, which I wouldn't have the capability to do nothing like that, like, to tell you the truth. But he had.
He never took a drink till he was 31, 32 years of age. And then the doctor says to him, you've run to that much pressure and you've that many men working for you and there's that much happening. You should learn to take 2 or 3 bottles of Guinness and, you know, learn to relax and a bit of a social life. But I'd say probably looking back, that was the worst advice I ever got. But at the end of the day, another time he'd say, run me up to Ballygolly there in the evening and that. And the first man he'd bump into would be John Finley. Go to Mercy and Roy, many's evening and Roy had been there too. And the two of them have been good friends down through the years, and they've been reminiscing about different skits and different times and different things that happened, and different plant and different machines, and it wouldn't matter who John Finley is with or who my father had been with. Once they met, the two of them would have great respect and great time for each other, and my father would have thought the world of John Finley and would have viewed him as a terrible genius of a man. But as time went on, I suppose my grandmother too sort of says, like in them days, your father done everything whenever he was terrible young, like in England, working on a lathe at 17, 23, 24 years of age, 50, 60 men working with him with engineering. And it wouldn't have mattered what he wanted to design or got half a notion of. Everything seemed to come very natural to him, like he never had any problem. And he thought everybody should have been the same, like, you know, how the God would you not know that, or how could you not see that? You know, and like, you know, we're talking in a period of time when there was no prototypes or there was nothing that you could have walked out and drew or went down and took a photograph of. Everything was original, like, and everything had to be drew up and made work from scratch. Nowadays, everything's copied or changed slightly, like, you know what I mean, and that's the way it is. But my grandmother says, you know, he done everything so young, he'll die young. And I mean, my grandmother had been a lady, like, a terrible, terrible nice woman. And sure enough, he took ill when he was 46, he took cancer. And basically, within a year, he was 48 when he was dead. But even at that time, like he was saying, I have a few ideas here now, and I need to get them through down here, and I need to get them sorted out here. But unfortunately, he died, as I say, at 48, and that was the end of that. There's a photo there of a forklift that he had made, and a grab there for P&B Clonaneese, and that's him sitting on it, only a very, very young fella, and that was back, what, 1960 or that?
That's the only photograph I have of him actually on one of those machines that he invented. And he made a lot of them over a period of years. There's
another photo there of the fellas in Africa where he sent out the block machine and shows them actually working.
He was at a charity do in Tyrone Hall, I think it was 68 or 66, and they were having raising money for the missions to build schools, and he seen the way of making blocks out of 4 September. So he said that he made block machines and he would donate a block machine to send out to Africa. In fact, he sent to Belfast and he sent on down and he paid for the whole transport to Africa. And there's the photograph of the way he's actually operated on the right stuff in the back. The back of
there. I am sure you recognise the Mallon block machine. It has been a great help to speed up the work. Once again, very many sincere thanks for this act of kindness. One time he says, I must organise meetings about alcoholism. It wasn't so much about drugs at that time. You know, maybe people needing help and stuff like this. And if he'd seen anybody in them situations, he would have been trying to help them, you know. So he arranged for this meeting anyway. And these people came into this hall to talk about alcoholism and addictions and that, you know. And there was a number of priests there and ministers there and nuns there. And this man was explaining about how addictive drink could be and alcoholism and getting help for it. And it was thrown out to the audience then, and asked them what their opinions was, and there was a couple of nuns sitting in the audience, and this nun says, no, she says, I think this is totally down to willpower, nothing else but willpower. And my father says, well sister, The next time you have the diarrhea, he says, try willpower. That was just a quickie to be, you know, with a monster, like, and the place was running around the floor, like, and the wee nun, I suppose, maybe laughed it off, but it was different words, maybe with the idea of the willpower. That was the title from it.
That Christmas drove hard. We think, well, the styrofoam that they played music on, and he had to buy one of them, and he learned to play it, and he could play the drums, and he played the accordion in the band. He was really into music, he loved music.
Aye, Chilly Wild Band, like, well, the pipe band, he was playing the drums and that at a very, very early age. And then the accordion band, he was one of the main men that got the accordion band going in Chilly Wild. He loved the accordion and he loved the pipe music. And as I say, he had maybe 20, 30 men in Chilly Wild Band marching on the 17th of March and 15th of August and that. And as there were struck at times that they got landed the drums from the Grey Stone bands, and the Grey Stones bands would have got landed the drums from them, and that's the way it worked among them. Nowadays, 70%, I think it's 65-70% of the world's screening equipment is built in Ireland, and in fact most of it will be built probably within 15 mile of a radius from here. So, you know, if you take it in that context on a world market and an achievement, you know, if, as I said before, if he was alive or about and was in Africa, India, Australia, America, you name it, Singapore, wherever you want to talk about, and you walk down the street and the next thing you see one of these machines sitting there,
A new version of them.
or a newer version of them, and you turn around and you say, well, how long? You know, God save us, that's unbelievable. Like, that started actually in Killesshil, 6 miles outside Dungannon in 1958, 59, 60. You know, it's some achievement. You know, when the men that started up the company in Dungannon at that time and developed it on from that, and that, you know what I mean, you know, they would have knew him extremely well too, and talking to any of them would have the utmost respect and for him, like, you know what I mean, and for his genius in developing stuff. So, like, you know, there's no shadow of doubt that was his field. If you take a look at the amount of companies that exist today in County Tyrone, the spin-off from that early days, God save us, it's unbelievable. From the Loch Shore till Monaghan till Oma, you name it.
Two extraordinary men who made an extraordinary contribution to our life, and their legacy still lives on. It still lives today. Now, all of these ideas, when taken together, hindsight, as they say, is the only exact science, were revolutionary. And they challenged old accepted concepts. At that time, Mallon Engineering employed on a part-time basis a young school teacher who taught in the local secondary school as a designer. Perhaps he more than anyone recognised the enormous potential of these machines. So he urged Sylvie to concentrate on selling and producing it as opposed to the other range of products that he was engaged in, such as the fixed quarry and washing plants, block machines, concrete plants, etc. And the newly recruited salesman that I mentioned, Pat Douglas, also recognised this potential. So there developed a bit of a tension between the people who were working for him in the design and sales and manufacturing department, and the tension resulted in them going to form their own company called Ulster Plant at Gilmer's Crossroads, just on the way to Gull Island, about 2 miles north of here. And they developed and slightly further developed these machines, and it heralded the birth probably of one of the most successful engineering companies in the history of this area. And it ushered in a new era in all aspects of design, production and marketing that most of the people who are involved in engineering would be familiar with here tonight. Other employees of Finley's and Mallon's also saw the need for the emerging market, and in their own way they started working on their own. because the demand for equipment was such that neither Finley nor Mallon could actually meet that demand. So a number of companies started up on their own. One of them was a man called Pat McKenna, who worked for P.S. Mallon. He formed Bridge Engineering. There were a couple of other guys who worked at one stage for Sylvie called Packy Loughran and Malachy Holland, who's here tonight. They formed a company called Loughran Plant. Frank Holland, my brother, and Mickey Mulgrew formed a company called Tyrone Engineering, both being employees of both Mallons and Finleys. And then Bertie Pickering and Jim Lappin of Craigavon Engineering, and the late Mickey McCourt and Dan Ruddy of Pomeroy Engineering. So if you look at a local map, we can see the gradual geographical spread of these companies, and thereby the increase in youth employment. As I said, gradually local enterprise and employment was beginning to make a dent in the unemployment figures and the emigration figures, both of which were very high at that time. By the early 70s, both Powerscreen and Finley had grown significantly and quickly outgrew their respective premises at Gilmore's, Crossroads and Cullentraw. And as you saw in the film, they moved to their current locations where they had sufficient room to expand as the need arose. Their concentration on mobile as opposed to fixed equipment was paying rich dividends. But shrewd marketing strategies had quickly made them the leading companies in the industry in the British Isles. Both were outperforming their UK-based opposition due to a number of strategies and policies which are then quite new and which we will briefly examine. Both companies were adept at identifying within their workforce ambitious young men. And both companies were anxious to give them enough rope to either hang themselves or make something out of themselves. And most of these men had young men had product knowledge that they gained on the workshop floor, not in a classroom or a laboratory. And they believed in the products that they were making, and they became great ambassadors for the country, for the companies in many countries, all over the world, the United States, Canada, Australia, and of course the UK. Indeed, many of them set up their own very successful businesses, and many of us here know people who live in various parts of the world who are millionaires. And the reason they're millionaires? Because they learned their trade in Dungannon or in the surrounding area. In fact, one of the old school buddies of mine is a fellow called Mickey Hughes, who runs a very successful operation in the town where Muhammad Ali was born, Louisville, Kentucky. That just gives you an idea of the reach that this industry has and is currently extending. Those of us old enough to remember the 1970s will remember the 3-day week and the industrial strife and everything that went with it. And the unions were holding power and sway before Maggie was on the game. But many of John Finley and Powerscreen's people and even the smaller engineering companies, they worked on the basis of a bit of mutual respect for their employees, and they paid them what they could afford. And they introduced systems to make them earn as much as they like to earn by having incentive schemes and making them, if you like, in-house suppliers to the company. A revolutionary idea, but at the same time, the people they were competing against, their workforce was standing at the gate with placards. So you can see that it's not just about engineering and ingenuity, it's about understanding the human psyche as well. So, I don't want to talk too much, obviously, about Powerscreen because the talk next month is by Pat O'Neill himself, and he will go into that in much more detail. But the Powerscreen and Finley group were in opposition, there's no question they weren't. And it was a healthy competition because they spurred each other on to great heights. One without the other would not have been what they both have become. I think that's pretty obvious. And there are many stories of those times of intrigue, and many of those stories probably are better left untold. But one that did amuse me was a long-standing employee and friend of John Finley, who went to see a customer from the south with John. So they stopped for lunch after they'd seen the customer in a restaurant in Dublin. John excused himself to go to the toilet, and this man sat and sat and sat, and after 20 minutes he got up and he went out to the reception. He says to the wee girl, "There was a man come in with me there, did you see where he went?" "Oh, I did, surely. Aye, he's away, he left there 20 minutes ago." So this man says, "Right, could you get me a taxi? Who's your best taxi service?" "Oh," she says, "I know so-and-so." So the taxi man come round and says to him, "Do you know where Ballygolly is?" He says, "I don't." "I'll show you where it is." He says, 100 mile up the road. The man says, 100 mile, you must be joking. He says, "I get paid for it, don't worry." So the taxi man took this guy in the car, up the road, landed at Dungannon. John, of course, was sitting behind the desk. His employee comes in and says, "There's a man outside there who wants to see you, John." "I shall bring him in." So the taxi driver comes in. He says to the taxi driver, "Much to owe you." That was his sense of humour. He was full of mischief. And there was no more talk about it. That's just the way it was. Here are some of the larger machines made by both companies, and a new industry arose out of these machines and designs whereby they were hired on medium and short-term contracts by new equipment hire companies. So in effect, they were encouraging people to buy them just to hire them out, and that became an industry in itself, more so in the UK and Germany and Europe and places like that. And people who hired them out then became the agents for them. So they were making it both ways. And it was a very clever strategy. But then people started to change tack a little and said, "Look, we're digging all these resources out of the ground, we're building houses with them, and then we're knocking them down, and what are we going to do with the rubble that we create?" So back to Dungannon, and a few people with their thinking caps on said, "We can recycle this material." And today, two of the biggest companies that are involved in that CDE Global, Dernisir Engineering, are making recycling equipment that actually reuses the aggregates and bring them back to their original state. You know, it is a phenomenal way to look at things. And there were incentives by governments to recycling contractors all throughout the United Kingdom, through Europe, to recycle. So the industry just changed tack a little and started to make machines similar to what you're looking at. There's also a machine made by McCluskey, which is a trommel screen, and it uses a different type of screen than what we've looked at. This is one of them here, where the screen rotates because some of the material is quite big, and that's a more suitable and efficient way of screening. In parallel with these phases of expansion, new companies are continuously being formed and are being continuously formed. And many of these entrepreneurs and former employees of existing companies, so soon that we have a network of companies each specialising in their own niche market. Today we can identify many companies who, in genealogical or family history terms, are children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren of Mallon, Finley and Peter S. There's a list of many companies that are currently operating in this sector, and they number now over 400. That's a phenomenal number of companies. Many of these are either suppliers to the big or long-established companies, while others have developed their own range of products. Indeed, many of these have inherited the traits and practices of those larger companies, and on their own account export their own equipment all over the world. There's just a guy here with a blue shirt. He sells his equipment everywhere. You go to Australia, you go to New Zealand, you could go to Canada, you go to the United States, and you'll see it. Who inspired him? He'll tell you himself. It's the people we're talking about. Other companies that provide services to the industry, including suppliers of automated and remote control systems, like FSL and Cookstown. So these machines can be operated by the loading shovel driver. so that he can actually press a remote control like you do on your TV, and that operates the machine. Then you have people who supply these component parts, which are rollers and beltings and end drums and hydraulic rams. And so we have companies here in the area who make these and supply them. Another gentleman here who imports these components from China, and they're used widely in the industry. Then we have companies who also make the running gear, which is the tracks that you see in these machines. And that company is locally owned as well. So all of these major players are now manufacturing mobile crushing and screening equipment. It's become an essential part of their operations. And of course the major players are Powerscreen, Finley, McCluskey, Maximus, and a number of other without a local base in Metso in Finland and France and the United States. But our local companies enjoy almost a virtual monopoly in the crushing and screening sector, and long may that continue. When I talk to many of the manufacturers today, everything is not as rosy in the garden as perhaps the picture I painted. There are potential threats and there are vulnerabilities. What are they? Well, if you look through the Courier or some of the local papers, or if you drive past some of these companies, you'll see signs, help wanted. Fitters, welders, fabricators. They just aren't there. Because we have, unlike the 1950s and 60s of Sylvia Mallon and John Finley, full employment. Anyone who wants a job can get a job. Problem is, there aren't enough people looking to do engineering. So we have had to, the industry has had to import people from Eastern Europe. But then along comes some bright spark and says, nah, we want to be on our own, we want outside the EEC. And they persuade people to vote for Brexit. And the people who come from Eastern Europe are saying, we're no longer welcome here, we want to go home. We can find work in Germany or Denmark and get the same money. Why should I come to Northern Ireland to work where I'm not welcome? Makes you wonder, why some people think that we are healthier outside the EEC, the biggest market, on our doorstep of 500 million people. It begs understanding. I find it just incredible, to think that people think like that. You've got to think forward, not look back. And the Brexit referendum result has had marked negative effects on employment sources. And we've got to address that. And thankfully, there are initiatives going on between the colleges and the industry to address that problem, where we entice more young people to come into the industry. I've often said, and I've heard it said, that we produce too many people who count money and sue people to take money from A and give it to B. But what we need are people who make money. That is the lifeblood of the economy. Not the bean counters, not the solicitors. It's the people who make things happen, who employ people, who create, as I said earlier in the talk, new money, who bring new money into this area, money that otherwise would not be coming into this area. And we wouldn't enjoy the standard of living that most of us enjoy because of that. It would also help if our local politicians would concentrate their energies on protecting existing employment instead of engaging in old, well-rehearsed arguments over the past. The future is more important for all of us, and we can influence the future, but we can't change the past. I'd finish off with a little story about John Finley's sales rep, who made a bit of a blunder. He made a blunder with a client, and he was called into the office, and in those days, back in the 70s, you got the rollicking and you accepted it and walked out, which he got. So a short time later, he was asked to go and see a Mother Superior in Strabane, who ran an institution for people with mental health problems. And apparently, according to John, I think John said, this wee woman needs some concrete blocks. Go up and see her. And here's a wee letter I want you to take with you. So, your man heads up the road. He's halfway up the Strabane and he's thinking, what the bloody hell's in this letter? So, he pulls in, stops the car, gets out, opens the bonnet, takes the radiator cap off and steams open the envelope. The letter read, I've been having a few problems of late, making mistakes in both my job, and my head's not where it should be, and I was wondering if I could stay with you for a while until I get myself sorted out. So that gives you an idea of the mischievous sense of humour that John had. I can't say much more than what I've already told you. I think we've gone through it in some detail. I just finished with one story that John's granddaughter here told me tonight about something that happened in Dublin over 100 years ago. And those of you who know a bit of history know that the Rising took place in 1916 and that there was a bit of trouble in Dublin for a couple of years after it. So everybody who came to court said, when they were asked how they plead, Your Honour, on my political beliefs and grounds, I refuse to recognise the court. And this happened with every defendant who made their way through. And at that time, there was a song which the Dubliners used to sing called Going Up to Monto. I'm sure most of you have heard it. The red light district of Dublin. And this lady of the night was the next defendant to appear in court. So the old judge looked over his glasses at her and he said, I suppose you're going to tell me, ma'am, that you don't recognise the court on political grounds. Ah, indeed I do, Your Honour. I recognise every bloody one of you. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, or if I can't, I'm sure there are people in the audience who can.
If you could hold off and use the mic, is it working here, Finley? Yeah. If you want to ask a question, if you can hold off to use the mic, please.
God, the talk must have been good.
Mayor Brenton, I'd like to thank a man here tonight. He worked actually with my father too from 63 to 69, and then he joined the Finley group and he actually represented them to Ireland, UK and most of the world. But there's Holland here, he gave him, my brother Christy here, the two of them built these models here, and it took a lot of patience and a lot of time and a lot of working out. But I'd just like to thank Mallon on behalf of Christy and myself there for
Thanks, Martin. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
No, I started out in the working Mallon's first and then went to Finley's later. And the thing that struck me there about the whole engineering, those two men knew each other from day one. They from Mallon's then Periscreen started, and Periscreen and Finley's then were probably the two leading companies in the world at that time. And to think that, now they have finished up within the one group, Terex. So it went full circle. So they're all part of the Terex group now, which is probably, I think, the third biggest engineering company in the world.
It is, because not only do they make what we talked about, they also make cranes and other construction equipment. Mostly sold in America that we wouldn't recognise here. But the chief executive of Terex was asked by one of the local agents in Ireland here, what was his best investment? He said buying power screen in Finley. Simple.
Yeah.
So that gives you, that gives you an idea. We're talking about probably the world's leading construction equipment supplier. And said their best purchase was the Finley Power Screen Group.
And my time working with both of them were some of the best times that I've had in my life. Great people to work for, and I must thank their offspring here for the well. Okay.
Thank you, Monica.